DW correspondent Janelle de Leon is joining us live from Berlin for more on this. Good evening to you, Janelle. Europe had started lifting travel restrictions, and now they seem to be closing down again following the new rise in COVID-19 cases. What is the latest there?
Well, now that there are fears of a second wave of coronavirus rolling around Europe, it's reignited discussions around lockdowns and fresh restrictions. So we basically had a situation here where there was renewed freedom to travel within Europe, at least for a while, but it led to concerns that holidaymakers were dragging the coronavirus with them to and from their home countries. So a bit of irony there for you. The restrictions are now in place again, because earlier restrictions had been lifted. But of course, it doesn't look the same across the board here in Europe. Germany is calling for mandatory testing for arrivals coming from areas deemed risky. Greece wants to see negative testing from arrivals from countries like Romania and Bulgaria. And you have the likes of the UK reimposing 14-day quarantines on arrivals from Luxembourg and Spain, which of course is seeing a renewed uptick in cases. Yesterday marked a post-lockdown record for them in terms of the number of new infections at 2,789 new cases.
Right, and looking specifically at Spain and the 14-day quarantine for travelers coming from Spain, this makes travel very unlikely. How is this going to affect the country, with tourism making up about 12% of the GDP there?
Basically, what happened was when the UK announced these new quarantine rules for travelers coming from Spain, there was a wave of cancellations from British tourists who were saying that they could ill afford to take 2 more weeks off of work to self-isolate at home after having just arrived from holiday. You had, for example, the largest European travel firm TUI cancelling its flights between the UK and mainland Spain. And there's also Jet2, that is a low-cost leisure carrier, basically reaching out to its customers in the Canary Islands, saying that they have to cut their holiday short or risk trying to find their own way back home. Now, all of this is important because Britain is the biggest source of tourists for Spain, followed by Germany. And as you mentioned there, it's a very important pillar of Spain's economy, with 12% of its GDP, 11% of tourism jobs also, by the way. So while we're seeing empty restaurants and empty hotels and empty bars, empty clubs all around Europe, Spain appears to be the hardest hit and will have the hardest time recovering.
Yes, and of course, countries in Europe were counting on tourist influx for a boost to their COVID-hit economies. But now this doesn't look very likely.
Basically, for all of the travel and aviation sector, it's wholesale misery all across the industry, from the airplane makers to the airlines themselves. Now, European plane maker Airbus, for example, it announced just yesterday a 1.9 billion euro loss in its quarterly results, and that it's going to have to cut a tenth of its workforce. Lufthansa, that's Germany's flagship carrier, now they were saved, of course, to the tune of 6 billion euros in state aid, but their future business is going to depend on whether they can pivot from making most of their money from business travel, as they do now, to leisure and tourism, which of course is going to be difficult given that all travel at the moment is fraught. Now, those are just some examples of some of the experiences that the big players are going through, but you also hear from smaller airlines like Iceland Air, for example, that said that it's going to have to let go of all of its flight attendants, and it's going to have to let the pilots pick up the slack, meaning if you are a pilot for Iceland Air and you're not currently flying, then you'll probably have to serve as crew for the flights that your colleagues are piloting. Now, it's not known yet whether they're really allowed to do this, but more than being just a quirky story, it just shows you how much pain the industry is in, from big companies to small companies all across the board.
Janelle, thank you very much for that report there.